Hello and welcome to our EA Ask an Expert today. It's a special edition, actually. We are joined from Helsinki, from the European Chemicals Agency, today for our chat on chemicals, safe and sustainable chemicals, in fact, and what the European Union is doing on this issue. Joining us today from Helsinki, Christelle Tissier and Bastien Ziege. And from here at the EEA in Copenhagen, Ian Marnane and Jeanne Weil. And today we'll be talking about safe, sustainable chemicals and our recently published joint report on this issue. And we'll also be able to take your questions today and comments. So if you have any questions or comments, you could put them down in the comment section and we will make sure our experts see them and hopefully we will be able to address them for you. So perhaps starting this discussion today, perhaps you can tell me a bit about the chemical safety and sustainability. Why should we be concerned?
Yes, I
Jeanne,
can
would you like
start
to?
on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, good question. So first, I think we need to understand that chemicals are everywhere in our daily life. We use them, we have them in all the products we use, basically. So the clothes we wear, the textiles, the furniture, but also maybe cosmetics, for instance, or products we use for cleaning our homes. So this means that they are an entire part of our society and that we need them, but we need them and we need to use them in a way which is safe and also sustainable. So maybe just to expand a bit on that, we are exposed to all these chemicals because, as I said, they are everywhere via the use of these products, but also because, for instance, industries or production processes use chemicals, so they may emit them to the environment, and then we are exposed to them. So we need to make sure that they are, when they are used and produced, they are safe and sustainable by default, basically. So of course we need to understand that not all chemicals are toxic or problematic. It all depends on their properties and at which levels they are found in the environment, which makes up the risk. But we also have to understand that some properties are particularly problematic, and we want to avoid them as much as possible, even if at low levels. For instance, endocrine disruptors like bisphenol A, or also chemicals that are persistent, toxic and bioaccumulative. Also because that comes back to the sustainability and how we can reuse things and recycle in a safe way without having these substances in the supply chain.
Okay. And what about specifically, maybe I can ask Christelle a bit about this on specifically hazardous chemicals. What is the specific risk there to our health and the environment?
Yes, so maybe I'll continue on what Jeanne was saying. So I think she mentioned already, for instance, those substances that are persistent and bioaccumulative. So beside being an issue for recycling, they will stay really for a long time in the environment. So meaning that the wildlife, but also us, through food or even when we go to swim in the water, we will continuously being exposed to them for many, many years. And we don't exactly, even for how long we will be exposed. Another category, for instance, are those carcinogen or toxic to the reproduction, to which we could be exposed, and again, would really affect the health of the population. So maybe those would be two categories.
Yeah. Bastien, maybe I can ask you, what's the EU doing to address this, and in particular, what ECHA and the EA are doing on this?
Sure. No, I can get started. Yeah. Thanks a lot, and hello, everyone. So, of course, this is a topic that's not new and that has been known for a long time. So there's actually a big suite of different legislative instruments already in place, about 40 of them. And they are there to regulate how chemicals are used, put on the market, and so on. Most prominently, this is the REACH regulation on the registration, evaluation of chemicals, and then also the CLP regulation, which is about labeling of chemicals and products and so on. And ECHA is actually in charge of implementing these two pieces of legislation. They form sort of the core, the heart of the approach in Europe. But then specific groups of chemicals are also regulated, for example, biocides or pesticides, plant protection products. And again, here ECHA is playing a role in the implementation. There are also sector-specific legislation. So when you think about cosmetics, for example, or pharmaceuticals, they are regulated through their own sets of legislation. And that also helps to minimize the risk that chemicals pose to humans and to some extent also the environment. And then certain products also, when you think of toys, for example, or food, they are regulated and in order to minimize the risk from chemicals in these products. Maybe I'll hand over to one of the colleagues in the EA.
Yeah, I was going to ask Ian a bit more on the environmental impacts.
Sure, and thanks, Constantin. Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, as Bastian said, it's important to actually control what chemicals are actually being produced and put on the market. But one of the other important elements is actually how if and how they're getting into the environment and the levels of chemicals that are present in the environment. So, for example, we have regulations around industrial activities to limit the amount of chemicals that they can release into the air or into the water. And so these are regulated across Europe in terms of some of these large industrial activities. And we also know that chemicals above certain levels can present a risk to the environment or to human health. So we also have a lot of regulations, for example, the Water Framework Directive around monitoring the levels of some of these chemicals that are present in our waters. And they set environmental quality standards. So the maximum amount of these chemicals that can be present in the environment so that we can determine whether our waters are in good status or in poor status, depending on the presence of some of these chemicals in the environment. So as well as controlling what chemicals we can produce, we also need to understand more what chemicals are being released into the environment, limit the amount of those chemicals, and also measure what's there so we can understand the risks that it poses to the environment and also to human health.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I could just add, Constant, also that that because there's such a large amount of regulation already out there, there's a good bit of interplay between them as well. So they sort of learn from each other whenever they are reviewed. All of the different aspects are taken into account, and there's a good bit of cross-pollination going on there.
Yeah, and indeed, talk about cross-pollination. Let's talk a bit about this joint report, and our colleagues will put the link in the comment section for our viewers if they want to access to the report and the indicator framework. Let's talk a bit about the report and the indicator framework and how this all fits in. Bastian, you want to take that one?
Sure. So this indicator framework that you can see online, that's really one of the actions under the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, which is by now a couple of years old. And when that was brought about, there was an action in there to make sure that we can monitor the implementation of the strategy itself. And for that, we needed a set of indicators at the EU level in order to follow important trends and make that assessment. And it was really the EA and ECHA who were tasked to support the European Commission in developing this framework. This was mostly a coordinating role, I would say, in the beginning, reaching out to all of the different EU institutions that have relevant data or information or a stake somehow in chemicals. And so this was really just like a big project, basically trying to draw together all of the different aspects, all of the different data available. And then it was about curating a nice framework that makes sense, that is coherent. And this was then really the core bit of the work, I would say, for EA and ECHA. To also conceptualize it, make it look nice, and in the end bring it online and make sure that it can be accessed and continue to do so. Together with the indicator framework, we also had a synthesis report, which was there to basically turn the indicators into knowledge that can then support the policymakers and the wider public in understanding what's going on with chemicals, and to assess where are we right now, and where are we in the future, and has the CSS brought about a positive change as desired, let's say. So this was an initiative that EA and ECHA took on their own, the synthesis report, in order to really create additional value from the indicator framework.
Mm-hmm. And before I have a follow-up on the indicators. If any viewers have questions or comments, please jot them down during our broadcast, and we'll make sure to get to them. Bastian, on the indicators, how many are there, and how long did it take to put them together?
There are 25 indicators, and then we also have 22 what we call signals, which are sort of, there's not really a time trend there, but they are still important pieces of information that can help interpret the bigger picture. And it took, I want to say, about 3 years to bring this all together. Yeah, and I explained already roughly what we had to do to get there.
Okay, Jeanne, I want to ask you, can you tell me what are the main objectives of the chemical strategy for sustainability?
Yes, so the CSS, the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, has 2 main objectives, but they're also part of the broader chemical legislation framework in the EU. So the first one is to prevent harm to us, humans, but also ecosystems, from hazardous chemicals and their toxic properties. And the second one is to support also the industry in the EU in transitioning, producing safe and sustainable chemicals. So this was really much the context of for this indicator framework, and therefore we have both indicators that look at the transition of the chemical industry towards producing more safe chemicals and in a more sustainable way, and also indicators looking at emissions of all types of chemicals, but also occurrence, risk, and sometimes impact.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I can ask Christelle, what are the key takeaways from the report then? What have we found out?
So as explained by Jeanne, we have looked at it from different angles. So maybe I can introduce a bit from the safe and sustainable and also what authorities have been doing. But from the safe and sustainable, of course, this is a very recent strategy has been published and is available now, but everything is quite new in that context. So what we have seen is that a lot of initiatives have been initiated, but there is still much to do to see actually something and to be able also to measure really how this transition is functioning. So this is what we took from the different indicators we had. Looking at the action from the authorities, there what we could see is that, as mentioned by Bastian, we have quite a lot of legislation in place, and authorities and so member state agencies, commission have been actually doing quite a lot in recent years, increasing the pace also in understanding chemicals and in particular their hazardous properties, and also taking action on a few groups. So this is what we could see. There is still a lot of need to gather information, generate information to understand even more, because there is really a large chemical universe, let's say, to go through. But there has been quite a lot of progress there. This is what we could see. And maybe I'll hand over to Jeanne, who can explain a bit more from the environment perspective what we identified.
Yes, so we have gathered both indicators and signals. First, in terms of how we are doing with the substances of concern in waste and secondary raw materials. And what we showed from this evidence was that there was little progress in reducing their presence in such waste and materials. So this is based on, for instance, hazardous waste production from the chemical industry and other pieces of evidence. Then we also have a series of indicators and signals looking at emissions, especially industrial emissions of chemicals to both air and water. And what is interesting to see is the effect of past regulation in reducing the emissions over time. But we also show that, unfortunately, some levels of specific chemicals are still too high in water or soil. So they still need to progress there. And then we have gathered as well data from human biomonitoring studies. So monitoring levels of chemicals in our bodies in Europe. And here we show how important a tool it is to understand our exposure to a multitude of chemicals and also especially a multitude of sources and pathways, and how it is important to continue having these studies to, at the EU level, understand how it's progressing from this baseline, and also if we can see any emerging risks at some point. Yeah.
Indeed, there's a lot of data and information to go through. I already have a question here from Aisha. What are the biggest challenges the EU faces in achieving its goals for sustainable chemical use by 2030? Who would like to tackle that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can say something about that, and maybe colleagues can chip in. But I think one of the issues we have, and one of the issues that the chemical strategy is trying to address, is the fact that it's such a complex area that chemicals are used in so many different places, that we have so many different pieces of legislation. And one of the things that we need to try and do, and the CSS looks to do, is to simplify the way that we manage chemicals. So, for example, this concept of one substance, one assessment, so that rather than looking at the impacts or the effects of chemicals separately across different pieces of legislation, that we make sure that there's a consistency in how we assess the risks that chemicals may pose to the environment. I think another significant challenge is that one thing that's been mentioned already is this idea of persistency, and that even when we stop using chemicals, that they will remain in the environment for a long time. So, for example, if we think about chemicals like mercury, there's been a huge amount of effort to reduce emissions and use of mercury, but it will still nonetheless remain present in the environment and present a risk for many years to come. So on one side, we have the work to prevent the use and the emissions of these chemicals, but we also need then have ongoing work to actually minimize the risk for those chemicals that are already present in the environment. So I think around those issues around the complexity are really ones that are going to be challenging to address.
Yeah, and I think it might be of interest to viewers to know how do you get the data for these indicators? Do the industries, do companies report the data to the Chemicals Agency and the EEA? How does that work?
Yeah, I can mention a couple of things. I mean, this is one of from the EEA perspective, we collect a lot of data from various sources. One source of data, for example, would be the data that we collect on emissions of chemicals from industrial activities. So this is something that we collect on an annual basis from tens of thousands of different industrial facilities across Europe. So they're collected by the countries, and then the countries report the data to the EEA, and then we use them as part of our assessments to look at how, for example, the emissions from these industrial activities are impacting on health and well-being. And we also collect data under the Water Framework Directive, as I mentioned already, and under the Air Quality Directive. So we're collecting huge amounts of data that we're then trying to interpret so that we can understand how this is affecting our health, how it's affecting ecosystems and biodiversity, etc. But The role of ECHA in relation to chemicals is slightly different. So this is something maybe that Bastian or Christelle wants to mention as well.
Sure, no, absolutely. So, of course, as I said already earlier, we are implementing the REACH regulation here, and one of the key things that companies have to do in order to sell their chemicals on the European market is to actually tell us, in this case, ECHA, the Commission, what kind of characteristics those chemicals have. So on the one hand, what kind of use is foreseen for them? What kind of chemicals are they in the first place? How can we identify them? And then also on their hazards and so on, and what measures are taken in order to minimize risks. So what kind of risk management measures are in place or operational conditions? Those kinds of things are reported to ECHA, and you can imagine Europe being one of the biggest chemical markets also in the world. There's a lot of data in there. It's very detailed. It's a large data set, and the exciting thing in this project was also for us to develop some additional indicators that hadn't existed before, and provide a better look into the data set without disclosing, of course, any confidential information, because we're talking about very sensitive data here, but sort of a meta look at the data that is reported to us. Perhaps Christelle wants to complement.
Working? No. Yeah.
Now it is working. I think you should be able to hear me. But I think you have already covered quite a lot. Just I thought to mention that REACH is one, but I think there is also other obligation, like under the biocide, pesticide. They also there generate a lot of information on the hazard, and also they have also to assess the risk. So not only REACH gather information.
Okay, good. We're getting some questions in from viewers. So again, if you have a question or a comment, please jot them down. We have a few minutes to address them. I have a question from Laurent. Which resources do you recommend for carrying out a double materiality analysis for a chemical company? It's a bit of a technical question.
Can you give us that one again, Constant?
Yeah. Which resources do you recommend for carrying out a double materiality analysis for a chemical company? Double materiality analysis.
Okay. Yeah, to be honest, I don't know what a double materiality analysis is, but what I would suggest is that if, in terms of looking for detailed data on chemicals, I think ECHA is really the place to go in terms of identifying that, in terms of the hazardous properties that chemicals may pose. From an EA perspective, our role that we have a lot of data and huge data sets in relation to chemicals, but it relates more to the presence of these chemicals in the environment rather than sort of the inherent properties or toxic properties that they might have. So I think maybe Bastian or Christelle wants to come in terms of the resources that are available from ECHA for people that are looking for information on specific chemicals.
Yeah, I can come in. I mean, ECHA is, of course, there to support companies because so many of them are reporting to us. We have a big set of guidance available on the one hand, but also actually sort of like life support. So please do reach out to us. We have a very active help desk, and we will certainly respond very quickly to whatever request you have.
Thanks. Before I get to the next question, a rough figure, how many chemicals are we talking about on the European market? The rough estimate number that are available, that are being used. Do we have a number on that at all?
There's a number in my head that's somewhere over 100,000. Is the number that I've heard. So I think it's fairly substantial. But Again, I think more than the number, the quantity or the volume of individual chemicals is important. And in some cases, there's huge volumes of these chemicals being used. And they're the ones that we should probably be focusing efforts on a little bit more.
Okay,
Yes,
good.
and I would
yeah.
say actually check out the framework, the indicator framework, because there's a couple of indicators there where you can see the trends in terms of the production of chemicals, for example. So go and check it out. We just may not have the numbers in our heads right now.
That's fine. That's fine. There's a lot out there. I have a question from Peter. Do we need to inform consumers directly, perhaps by warning labels on consumer products made from plastics, including textiles? He's referring to research by the PlastChem project, which reported 3,600 plus unregulated plastic chemicals of concern.
Maybe I can say a few words on this, but please, colleagues from ACAD, complement if I think that would be needed. No, in terms of indicating and labeling products in the EU, there are already in place some clear guidelines and requirements to actually display hazards that may be on products. For example, recently, the new hazard class on endocrine disrupting chemicals has been put in place. So there are already for key chemicals, especially most harmful chemicals, that is one family or group of substances under the CSS, there are already clear labels on that. But maybe what is also important here is that on the source, the raw material, sorry, we have these labels, and then it's more difficult when it comes to secondary raw materials or recycling materials.
Okay, good. Basti, I have a question for you. In this framework of indicators, what are the specific metrics or parameters being considered when you're looking at all this data?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I said earlier already there's 25 indicators, so it maybe goes a little bit beyond our capacity right now to do this verbally, but besides, for example, the production of chemicals, which helped us to assess, for example, this element of safe and sustainable by design. Or safe and sustainable chemicals. On the other hand, we have an overview and trends in terms of the assessment of chemicals here at ECHA and elsewhere in order to follow and enable regulatory action. So that's obviously important to know when you want to minimize and control pollution from chemicals. And then, of course, all of the data that the EEA is also involved in, for example, on air pollution or releases to water, waste statistics, those kinds of things that are more in the EEA's realm. They really help then when it comes to eliminating and remediating chemical pollution. So that just to give you some examples of those three different ones, and these signals were also important, as I said. So, for example, on the grouping of chemicals, how that helps us speed up regulatory action. And yeah, a whole host of other examples. But yeah, again, go and check out what we have online to see it.
Yeah, for sure. We're running out of time. I'm aware of that. One more question from the viewers, from Oliver. How do you envisage essential use being implemented in regulation? Is there concern that it may be difficult to enforce due to differing subjective points of view? The CSS states critical for the functioning of society. I don't know if you can answer this one at the moment.
Yes, well, from just briefly on this, there was essential use criteria published recently by the Commission. So this sets out how we define and identify what those essential uses could be. But obviously it remains to be seen how these can actually be implemented in practice and how they can be We ensure that there's no creep, for example, in terms of how these criteria are being interpreted as well. So I think this is still a work in progress, constant in terms of this. But I think it's really vital that we're quite consistent in terms of the application of these criteria to make sure that we don't see any abuse or increase in the level of some of these chemicals that are known to be harmful.
Great. I know we're out of time, so perhaps one final question: how do we take this work forward? Will there be another follow-up on this?
Yeah, so we definitely plan on maintaining the dashboard online, like updating as soon as we have other data coming in. It's a bit complicated because data were collected from different agencies, EU agencies, and from the Commission, from different departments. But we'll do our best to update it as soon as we can. And then we also work on developing it further. So for instance, both ECHA and EEA are part of an EU-level research partnership called Partnership for the Assessment of Risk from Chemicals. And here we are looking closely at what are the outcomes from research projects in terms of data that could inform some of the signals we have already that could maybe become indicators showing a trend, or also maybe build new indicators, filling some of the gaps we have identified in our synthesis report. And also there are other data flows that we have not fully investigated yet that we are planning on looking at. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
And just to add very quickly, I think, yeah, as Jan said, this is really a baseline assessment, and it's something that will be used over in the future, because in order to meet the objectives of the CSS, it's going to take time. So this is something that we'll be able to refer back to over the course of a number of years to see where we're making progress, where we're not making progress, maybe where we need new policy actions, etc. So that's really the purpose of this, is to understand how we're doing and where we need to do better in order to deliver on these objectives.
Great. I'm afraid we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much to our colleagues at ECHA in Helsinki, Christel and Bastian, and also Jean and Ian here in Copenhagen. And thank you to the viewers for watching and for your interest and for taking the time today. We'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.